Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of War Thunder. As you can probably tell from the pictures of the American tanks, this is going to be one of those episodes where I look at new vehicles and aircraft being added into the game and give a basic analysis on them, what will be good about them, bad about them, how they fit into the game, all that good stuff. This is my first time doing it on tanks, so please forgive me if I get anything too wrong, or, not the information, but if I do things wrong in the video in general. I have tried to use sources from books as much as possible. I will leave them in the description. I have had to rely on the internet for some of the stuff, especially on the first tank we're going to be dealing with. I've also got some pictures of the tanks in the real world to hopefully mix it up a little bit. But without any further delay, let's get on to it. Now, the first tank we're looking at is the M2 medium tank, the one that was first revealed. Now, according to the devblog article they've done on it, it was a United States Army tank first produced in 1939 by the Rock Island Arsenal, just before the commencement of war in Europe. It weighed 18.7 metric tons, had a main armament of one 37mm gun, and with 200 rounds of ammunition, and a top speed of 26 miles per hour. Now, other sources I've seen have also talked about the secondary weapons being between 7 and 9 30 caliber machine guns with 12,250 rounds. Yeah, that is a lot of ammunition and a lot of machine guns. I've never heard of a tank having that many machine guns, if I'm honest. Armour, for the M2 it was 6.4 to 32mm. Now, interestingly, there was a second variant, the M2A1. As far as I can tell, this was the main variant produced. There was 18 M2s and 94 M2A1s. So the M2A1 had 51mm of armour instead of 34. I assume we're going to get both of these in the game, because the M2 I assume will be like a reserve tier tank, something like that. And we'll possibly get a M2A1 the next one up, and then presumably we'll move on to the M3 Stuart. Now, it wasn't a particularly successful tank. I mean, it did have okay armour, I suppose, frontally at least. I mean, the Panzer II in the game, the 2C, the German reserve, has 35mm on the hull and 30 on the turret. The Russian reserve tier, the T-26, only has 15mm, so it's better than the Russian and German tanks. But it has got okay sloping at the front. I think that's probably one of the only upsides to the shape of the tank. Yeah, the frontal glacis is quite well sloped, but it's got a lot of flat sides and edges at the rear and the side. It's an extremely tall tank. It's just, it's not a very. It's a lot taller than the German and Russian tanks, from what I can understand, or reserve tanks. So it's an easy target. So, and other than frontally, it should be relatively easy to penetrate. Now, the M3 37mm gun wasn't that good. Once the war really got started, it was obsolete against most tanks. But it is a higher caliber cannon than the German tanks, the 20mm cannon, less than the Russian 45mm cannon. And since it will probably be going against light tanks, pre-war and early war light tanks, it could still have a role to play, be rather successful. Had 6 crew from what I understand, a commander, a driver and 4 gunners. I don't know if that changes depending on the how many machine guns you have. Like I said, it could have 7 to 9. All in all, I think it's going to be a mix between the German and the Russian tanks. Like I said, it's got the gun of the Russian a gun similar to the Russian tank, armour similar to the German tank, but the speed is also nearer to the German tank. So if you play it well, if you use it as a sort of shoot and scoop tank, if you rely on that frontal armour, never show your flanks or your rear, well, goes without saying anyway, you could probably make some good use of it. That tall superstructure is going to be a bit of a problem though. You are going to be a bit of an easy target. I'm not sure on the turret armour, but probably not going to be as thick as the glacis. So yeah, it seems like an okay reserve tank for America. Just play it to its strengths, avoid its weaknesses, and you should do all right. Now, one quick bit of advice. When looking for information on the M2 medium tank, don't get confused with the M2 light tank. I've shown a picture of the light tank now. I've seen a few people try to find information on the medium tank, end up looking at the light tank, and just getting completely wrong information. The medium tank was never used in combat. The light tank, I think, was used at Guadalcanal or somewhere in the Pacific. When that sort of led on to the M3 Stuart, from what I understand. Could be in the game, but just don't get confused between the two tanks. Now, the next thing on our list, it's not a tank so much. It's an M16 MGMC. I'm reading from the devlog description again. Was used in the Philippines in World War II and also later in Korea. It was an M3-based multiple gun motor carriage equipped with the Maxim M45 quad mount, more specifically the M45D, with 4 M2 HB, I believe that stands for heavy barrel machine guns, 5,000 rounds, had a weight of around 9.3 tons, and its maximum speed was 45 miles an hour. So, well, you can see it's a anti-aircraft gun fitted onto a half-track. Not really sure what else to say about it. It will be at a disadvantage compared to the German and Russians because it uses such a low caliber. I believe the Germans, I think the lowest one the Germans use is something like 20mm. The lowest the Russians use is 25. Just looking for the Germans. Lowest the Germans use is 20. These are 50 caliber machine guns, so 12.7mm. So in sheer stopping power, it will have a bit of a disadvantage. Where it will have the advantage, I'm guessing, will be in the rate of fire. I mean, it's a machine gun, not a cannon, so it will probably be firing a hell of a lot of rounds up into the air. So more chances of actually hitting your target. Not as much of downing it, unfortunately, but you will be firing so many rounds. If you do actually get a proper lead on your target, you're going to be putting so many bullets into them, you probably will have a decent chance of downing the enemy. But if you only get a few bullets into it, obviously a few 50 caliber bullets isn't going to have quite the same effect as a 20mm. Where it will go, I'm guessing this will be a tier 1 or tier 2. I mean, because of taking into account its caliber, I mean, it seems to be how it's done roughly. The higher the tier, the higher the caliber, the higher the tier. I think it will have some success. I mean, for those who have tried the Germans and Russians, I haven't tried them myself. I'm not sure what their rate of fire is. But if you're looking for something that's got a higher rate of fire than them flak panzers and Russian self-propelled AA guns, you probably, will quite like the half-track. The other disadvantage, obviously, is if you're in a German half-track or a German anti-aircraft gun or a Russian anti-aircraft gun, if a tank comes across you, you can fire back and have a reasonable chance of doing some sort of damage. I wouldn't even bother with the the half-track. I mean, you might disorientate them if you fire enough bullets at them and cause enough sparks, but that's literally all you're going to do other than scratching paint. So, good to have it in the game. It'll be a unique anti-aircraft gun compared to the other ones. And, yeah, I think it'll do reasonably well. If you stick to just anti-aircraft gun duties, don't even bother going near a tank for this thing. Now, the next tank we'll be looking at, I'd be rather surprised if nobody could recognise it. The M4A1 Sherman, or M4A1 (76) Sherman tank. Going by the description guide you're giving us again, M4 Sherman is the main medium tank designed and built by the United States for the conduct of World War II, employed in North Africa, Sicily, Italy, Western Europe, and throughout the Pacific Theatre. A total of 49,234 Sherman tanks were produced between 1942 and 45. Modification M4A1-76 was armed with a 76mm M1 cannon to fight the most up-to-date German tanks, the Panzer V Panther and the Panzer VI Tiger. I think that's how you pronounce it all. This modification was produced towards the very end of World War II, with 3,396 tanks built in total. Now, first of all, just in case anyone's been confused, this isn't the Sherman Firefly. That was armed with a 17-pounder 76.2mm cannon. This is the M1 with a 76mm cannon. Just in case anyone's getting confused there, there are probably going to be some people who have got confused, possibly. It's also quite dissimilar to the M4A2 that we've already got in the game. I believe you could get it if you were an early access multiplayer tester for the ground forces. That, like I said, it was the M4A2 if you could get for being early access, and the main difference is the M4A2 was welded and more angular, so lots of angles, whereas the M4A1 hull was cast steel, so it displays a more rounded shape. That's what it says in my book anyway. So that sort of explains why they look a little bit different. Because I've seen that question come up a few times before. Now, with regards to armour, there's a bit of confusion, at least for me. The picture you're seeing is actually the one Gaijin used when they made the changes to the M4A2's armour. Like I said, the only difference between the M4A2 and the M4A1 was one was welded, one was cast. As you can see here, it's basically the biggest bit is about 76mm, or the thickest bit of armour. Apart from this little bit down at the bottom, which is 108. This has caused some confusion because a lot of my books, which give the specification for the M4A2, like I said, they seem to be the same apart from how they were produced, the cast-in welding. I don't think they would affect the armour too much. Not an expert in armour though. But they both list it as about between 13 and 105mm. Whereas the Wikipedia lists it as about 76 millimeters maximum, and then Gaijin, well, they had confusion themselves because they had to change it. They basically have it as 108, 76, mostly 108, 76 around the turret for most of it. There's one bit that's 89. So a bit of confusion how they're going to do that. I'm assuming it's going to be similar to the M4A2. Or at least similar to how it was after it had been corrected. I haven't really looked much into the M4A2 in the game. I don't know how it performs in the game. I've heard a lot of complaints that it's over-tiered. I don't know how it will be once it's actually added into the game. The M4A1 76mm, obviously it's got a better gun. But yeah, I can't give a definitive answer on the armour, unfortunately, because, like I said, there seems to have been a lot of confusion around it. Now, looking through my books, again, I've got specifications for the M4A2, mainly. And I've got it listed as 40 kilometres an hour. Now, this 40 kilometres an hour in miles per hour is 24. And this is for road. Cross-country, it's listed as 28 kilometres an hour, or 17 miles an hour. And that sounds a little bit on the slow side. I mean, the Tiger 1 can go at 28 miles an hour. So assuming that's road speed, 40 kilometres an hour, yeah, technically the Tiger would be faster than the Sherman. Now, I had heard they were actually roughly similar speeds, or could go similar speeds, but I've never heard of the Tiger being faster than the Sherman. Now, when I go and pop over to Wikipedia, again, not exactly something I, particularly rely on. I've got it listed as 25 to 30, or 40 to 48. Which, 40 on my one comes out as 24.8, 48 kilometres an hour comes at just under 30, so maybe they're rounding, I don't know, but that sounds, a lot more feasible, or, a lot more likely than the 28 kilometres an hour. So, yeah, I believe it'll probably be about 40 to 48 kilometres an hour, so about 25 to 30. Now, where do I think it will go on the tech tree? I'm going to have to base this all on the penetration value of the gun, really, because, like I said, a bit of confusion around the armour. I doubt they'll look at the speed for where they're going to tier it is as well. Now, assuming you're using the armour-piercing capped ballistic capped, it's a bit of a weird name, it can penetrate between 98 and 93 millimeters of armour at 500 meters. Now, this is kind of similar to the late Tier 3 tanks that the Germans and Russians use. I think Germans is about mid-Tier 3, Russians late Tier 3. So I think it will probably be a late Tier 3, mid-Tier 3 tank. I can't see it being any lower than that, and I really, really doubt it would be Tier 4. I think it would be an okay tank. Depending on the muzzle velocity of the gun, I'm trying to find it. Oh, I can't find the muzzle velocity of the gun, unfortunately. But I think if you're, at a distance, you probably will have a decent chance of destroying your enemy with this. Will it be as good as the other German or Russian tanks? Not really sure. I mean, I haven't used the M4A2 Sherman. That was already in the game because obviously I wasn't a tester. But I think this would be a decent tank, and if you play it to its strengths again. And yeah, it would be. You can't really do a game without the Sherman in it. I'm just hoping they will add the 75mm gun variant as well, because obviously we need something for lower than mid-tier 3. And I think it'll be a good tank in general for the game to have. Now, the next tank on our list is the M41 Walker Bulldog. Going by the description given by Gaijin, the M41 Walker Bulldog was a US light tank developed to replace the M24 Chaffee. It was named after General Walton Walker, who died in a Jeep accident in Korea. Its weight was 23.5 tons, had a main armament of a single 76mm M32 gun, and the vehicle had a top speed of 45 miles an hour. Now, I haven't been able to find much information on this tank, mainly because my books don't actually list it for some reason, even the Cold War ones. So I'm sort of having to rely on internet sources again. I do apologise. Now, as far as I can tell, it had a crew of 4, and the armour was only up to 38mm thick. But again, it was a light tank. If it's anything like the Chaffee or the Stuart, I assume this was mainly for scouting. But obviously at some point have decided to have a very big gun on it. Won't be able to take many hits, but it should be able to deal with any targets that it comes up against. It also had a secondary armament of 130 caliber and 150 caliber machine gun. Now, these were first used in Korea and Vietnam, in the Vietnam War. I don't know how they did in Korea. In Vietnam, apparently 17 M41s knocked out 22 North Vietnamese army tanks in one battle. 6 of them were T-54s and 16 were PT-76. So, T-54s are like the best tanks, or one of the best Russian tanks in the game. So, hopefully it will be able to stand up to the late-tier Russian tanks. Again, that armour is going to be a bit of a problem, but with the speed, 45 miles per hour, I think it was listed. Yeah, 45 miles an hour. It's going to be an extremely fast tank. This is going to be, one of those shoot and scoot tanks. Drive to an area, fire off a shot, knock out your enemy, and then quickly drive off before they can return fire or anyone notices you're there. So you're going to have to play this tank, actively. You can't just sit there and camp sort of thing, because, if anyone sees you, you're dead in, like, the first hit, or at least majorly damaged. Where it will go tier-wise, I don't know what the penetration value of the gun is. I mean, that's why I was listing how many tanks were knocked out in that battle, because I haven't been able to find much information on the gun. But if it's meant to go against T-54s, let me just check. Now, they're both tier 5, the T-54s in-game. So I'm guessing this will be an extremely late tier 4 or tier 5. I mean, there's no way it can be any lower than that. It's a Cold War tank. It must be tier 5. There's no way I'd be very surprised if it's lower than tier 5. I think this will be a very good tank to have in the game as well. It's because it's fast. Good gun. I mean, most of the tier 5 tanks in the game at the moment, they're just, ridiculously slow, well armoured, big gun. So this will sort of move away from that, hopefully. And yeah, I think it'll be an extremely good tank to have in the game. Now, this next tank on our list, I was extremely surprised to see, in a very good way. I'd read about it before, but it was a tank that had always kind of interested me, along with the Conqueror heavy tank. We'll go by Gaijin's description of it quickly. Early prototypes of the M103 heavy tank were created in 1951 to 54 to counteract the heavy tanks developed by the USSR. It was put in service in 1956, being the largest and most heavily armed combat tank ever made by the USA. I believe it kept that record until like the 1980s with the Abrams. A total of 300 pieces of A1 and A2 modifications were built. These huge combat vehicles stayed in USMC service until 1973. Now, the M103, like the Conqueror heavy tank, was sort of designed to provide long-range support in the case of the M103 to the 90mm armed M48 tanks. It's actually described as an upscaled M48 tank, more or less, and to counter the Soviet IS-3 tanks that have 122mm guns. Because remember during World War II they hadn't had anything to really counter German long range guns, and then they had to deal with these 100mm plus guns from the Soviets. So it was armed with I believe it was a 120mm gun. Yeah, 120mm gun, and two 30 caliber machine guns coaxial, and one 50 caliber on the roof. Which pretty much standard. Ammunition types the following ammunition types could be fired: APT, HE, HET, WP, WPT, and TPT. Now, WP I'm guessing is white phosphorus. TPT, I have no idea what the hell that would be, honestly. I will try and find out what it is very quickly. Try and see if I can Google it. No, I can't find anything on it. If I find any information, I'll leave an annotation. Like I said, these were heavy tanks, one of the heaviest the US Army actually fielded until like the Abrams. It says here they were sent to West Germany, like the British conqueror, but because of the size and weight, were difficult to conceal, which you can understand because they're big, heavy-ass tanks. Now, none of my books actually have the armour listed, unfortunately. The general figure I'm getting online is about 180mm. It's not quite as thick as the IS-4's turret or the Tiger II's turret, but it should be, decent enough. Hopefully, the gun will make up for it. Now, most of these actually went to the Marines, from what I can understand. They were used as infantry support. Some of them were rebuilt to have a different engine. I think the M103A2, which increased the operational range from 80 to 295 miles an hour. Miles, and speed from 21 to 23 miles an hour. Now, one downside, more of the gun than the tank itself, is the ammunition. Instead of being loaded normally, like you just put the shell in, the propellant and the actual shot you're firing were sort of separate. 38 projectiles, and you had the same number of charges. So you had to load both into the tank, and this has resulted in a weird situation where you have 5 crew, commander, a gunner, and a driver, but 2 loaders. So that's probably going to slow the rate of fire right down. But at the end of the day, I'm very glad they put this tank in. I was very surprised when I saw it on the list. So yeah, congratulations to Gaijin from me for that. I think it'll be on the tech tree. It'll be tier 5 easy. It's meant to deal with the IS-3, a tier 5 tank. The only other tank, and there's only a few other tanks above that, so it'll be tier 5 easy. That's where I'll say it'll be. I'd be extremely surprised if it's any lower than that. But slow tank, good gun, slightly worse armour than some of the other tanks, or about the same as some of the other tanks. But it should be, if you operate it well, it should be, as a long-range support weapon, it should be a good tank to use. So, that's the end of that look at the American tanks. How do I think they will actually be? Well, I think I'm rather confident about the American tanks being added in. They seem to have added a good mix of them. Lower tier tanks, higher tier tanks. Wondering how they're going to do for tier 2 and tier 4. I mean, remember we did only get 5 vehicles, one of which was an AA vehicle. I am interested to see how they'll do tier 2, especially tier 2, because none of these really seem to fit in there, except possibly the M2A1. And what other information can we get? They'll be included in update 1.45, known as Steel Generals. So I'm guessing that's going to be mainly based on American tanks. When is that going to come out? I'm not entirely sure. I think I've heard Lassar mention something like 1.45 will be in about the end of the year, New Year. So probably on the other side of it'll probably be after January the 1st, not very far after, possibly a little bit before, if they really, work extremely hard on it. But yeah, I'm looking forward to these new tanks and anti-aircraft guns being added in. I think they'll be really good, and I'm not much of a tank player, but I'll definitely stick around to play some of the tanks, or at least test them out. Especially looking forward to the M103 and some of the higher tier tanks. Now we've just got to wait for the British and the Japanese, and we'll have them all sorted, and we can move on to the naval warfare. So anyway, thank you for watching. Sorry it's been a bit of a long video. Leave a like if you like the video. Subscribe if you like these sorts of videos. Leave feedback. Can always do feedback. Could always use feedback. Sorry. Yeah. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.